Beautiful, right where it needs to be. The whole world is finding out who everyone is here more and more because you guys come with truth, with proof, with physical evidence, and so much more. Mr. Dan Willis, sir, may we come to you, my love?
Well, thanks to you, Danny. I don't do conferences, but last year I was able to be honored with my wonderful science team, Chris Sohn, Kent Noonan. We presented for the first time on our planet an operational frill crystal generator, which is still being optimized. And my science team is going to join me this year. Um, it's an interesting sequence of events, from being a top secret military witness back in 2001, thankfully inspired Dr. Michael Salla doing the important work he's doing, to 1977, where I had an interaction with an emether, which I just recently learned there was a science transfer program from Elena. And I wouldn't be involved in this unless my dear friend and our mutual dear friend, Elena, was able to establish physical communications through her quantum communication implant with a Palladian scientist who originally he was going to a university in the Pleiades, learning how to terraform planets. And now he's currently on Mars doing terraforming operations. And over 2 years ago, I joined Elena on a show, and she said that he could answer some questions regarding crystal technology. And this is something I was involved in back in the 80s with Dr. Marcel Vogel because of the emether experience having to do with the relationship of geometry of the matrix and consciousness. It led me to work with Marcel Vogel, which was working with the interface of cut crystals and consciousness. So we started asking questions. So we have over 2 years of, you can imagine, 2 years of question and answer. And my objective is to, one, to establish the credibility of this contact that we're having and actually quantify and show before everyone that this is measurable technology that's real. And secondly, to give applications that will be open source to the entire planet. And I've identified at least 7 applications of this technology. This is technology that, now everything has to be done according to the Prime Directive. And he's been able to answer all of my questions except for one, which Thorhan had to get special authorization from the Galactic Federation because it's their primary technology that they use to power their planet. Now, we can't use this technology yet to power our planet, but it has incredible capabilities. In fact, it's how they can take the etheric energy and convert it into physical reality. And anyway, I will be going over the science that we've learned, and also, this is something that people can get involved with and produce on their own, like Tony is doing. We call it the reality modulator. It can actually, with your interface of consciousness, go into what's called the void and actually imprint realities that can precipitate into physical manifestation. Anyway, let's see, what else? There's a whole lot to this, and probably don't have enough time to go into all the details, but that's kind of the overview.
Yeah, it was a world first last year with you when you brought the frill generator and demonstrated it and unveiled it for the very first time with Chris Hasson and Kent Noonan and your science team. And it was beautiful, and it gave such hope and such a wonderful idea moving forward of how we will be integrating off-world technology, how we're already doing it, how the technology is already here, and people like us are revealing it. We're not waiting. We don't need to wait. We now take it into our hands. We're pushing forward, and we're letting people know what time it is. And of course, with the Prime Directive, you working directly with the, Jen Han, a beautiful Pleiadian being, physical person, not a wishy-washy spirit that's made up in someone's mind, a real physical person. You've been able to, on their timeline, help land that and integrate that. And this year, people will be able to actually see it again, see it, feel it, you know, be a witness to it. And that's so exciting, Dan, isn't it?
Oh, it's not just the showing it working and showing some models of some of the technology that's derived from what we've learned, but it's the knowledge that he has shared that how the geometry of the multiverse that we're in, and the how the mathematics of the different torsion fields as they come together is what he calls the uh, subliminal point of transflexation, that at the point where these torsion fields come together in the crystal and create this phase conjugation node that allows to imprint into into what they call the void.
Beautiful, incredible, wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Dan Willis. Now we're going to come across to another Dan, the one and only Dan Winter. Hello, sir. How are you? And welcome.
Yeah, thank you for including me, Donna. You know, your team, your group is so fabulous. And my role is a bit humble here. Most people know that I've been teaching physics of consciousness for like 30 years, fractalfield.com, flameinmind.com. And I had done, maybe about 8 or 10 interviews with Elena Danaan, wonderful, on the physics of the nine and the physics of portals and stargates. And then we had a bit of a turning point. Actually, specifically because Jean-Charles is so courageous. And that is, you know, we said, Jean-Charles, well, if you're doing this teleport thing, we should be able to measure that. And Jean-Charles was courageous and disciplined because he actually followed instructions beautifully, which is that he got the hardware. It's flameinmind.com. It's a Muse headset, measures your brainwaves, and use our software, flameinmind.com. And just a relatively short recording, but at that particular moment, when Jean-Charles felt that, as you said, Jean-Charles, you felt that moment when you were about to, and remember, Jean-Charles had repeatedly been teleporting with witnesses, came back with sand between his toes and all that cool stuff. But so the cool thing is he was able to do it with the brainwave transducer on, made the recording, and so we sent the recording to our programmer, Patrick Botti, who was with us in France last year with Jean-Charles. And Patrick Botti fell off his chair. I mean, no, what it is it's the alpha to gamma, a series of harmonics around 8 hertz, which is, by the way, Schumann, 8 hertz up to about 44 hertz, 60 hertz. And that cascade from alpha to gamma was extremely off the charts coherent. And there's the amplitude of the harmonics was very coherent, had to turn down the gain. So Jean-Charles' brainwaves were literally imploding. Now, we have a lot of background on this because we've been teaching kids to see without their eyes, you know, which is very famous. When kids go into a trance state, they imagine they're in beautiful nature and they make these gorgeous brainwaves, and then they're blindfolded and they can see with their eyes, without their eyes repeatedly. But interestingly, and here's another point that's coming up, those same kids who make those same brain waves as Jean-Charles, except not nearly as high in amplitude, actually, but they begin to get clairvoyant. They start seeing their dead grandmothers and their parents have a cow. but I have a point here, and the point here is the principle. So what all of this is pointing to is that we can now talk about very accurately. And actually, Dan Willis, I think, used the correct term. He called it phase conjugation, where inertia connects at a node. Exactly right. So what's happening in Jean-Charles' brain is that massive coherence in the vortex, liquid crystal charge vortex in the brain, comes to a point, and those harmonics are tuned to something called golden ratio, which is fractality perfected, and the powers of golden ratio times Planck, the musical key signature of the universe, called PlanckFire.com. It's my new book, saying that exact geometry of charge collapse implosion is the cause of gravity, consciousness, life force, and all negentropy. It's pretty cool. And charge collapse is a powerful, powerful thing. And it was happening in Jean-Charles' brain. And my job here, what I want to do at GSIG is I have one simple little task here, and that is I would like people to go home from there with an actual practical, understandable, layman's sense of how these things work. And the thing that's fun here is the physics of why Jean-Charles was able to teleport, and the physics of why the kids get clairvoyance, and the physics of how the portals and stargates work in general, and the physics of how the fire crystal works, are all basically based on the same simple idea. Now, we've been working on this, Dan Willis is working on the fire crystal, and I had many years of fun with Marcel Vogel also. And thanks to Tony, we just made a new video series on this, and Tony's editing, and we're having some fun with this because Tony took his crystal and he zapped the water and did some amazing healing. And we know what came out of that crystal into that water that did the miracle healing. We know how it worked. It's something called the phase conjugate pump wave. You visualize a caduceus. It's imploding. It's going to a center point. And as it reaches that center point, the inertia in the charge vortex is converted from something called transverse up and down wave at the center point into something electrical engineers would call coherent longitudinal waves or interferometry, which Dan Willis also named correctly, calling torsion or scalar, which is other terms for the same thing, which is this coherent longitudinal output. And when the longitudinal waves, and we've got graphics for this, by the way, you can see all the graphics at preview, fractalfield.com/slideshow. They're all there. I'm not going to show them now. But when the longitudinal waves come out, they embed into an array. Geometry of hydrogen, DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and the geometry of every living protein, and the geometry of the fact that all orbital mechanics are dominated by golden ratio. So when the longitudinal waves come into that array, the physics of literally lucid dreaming, and that's the second point we show the science of in the talk we're going to do, that the harmonics that trigger lucid dreaming is the same implosion set called phase conjugate pump wave. So the reason you lucid dream, the reason you take memory through death, called our new project, physicsofsoul.com, is you get coherent into this longitudinal array. So let's go back to Jean-Charles. Jean-Charles, didn't you say, Jean-Charles, that usually when you first started this, it always involved the beach? Didn't you say that? And see, the beach is a place where the longitudinal coherence is more available. It's the crossbar. And by the way, we think sunrise and sunset are good times, et cetera, et cetera. So what we're saying here is that once we understand the primary electrical geometry, and it's perfectly applied in the fire crystal, and we're developing new fire crystal technologies, and we're going to have fun with Dan Willis too on this, that we think we now know the perfect feed frequency, this implosion frequency. It's called flameandmind.com, where you can feed that to a crystal. You feed it to a piezofire.com, our healing oscillator. We feed it to therify.net, our implosion plasma technology that's doing rejuvenation around the world. All of these things, every single thing I have talked about so far, especially including pyramidwirelesspower.com, they're all based on only one simple frequency cascade, Planck times golden ratio, the perfect caduceus. All the perfect way to drive a crystal. So when Dan Willis talked about powering your planet, if you check out pyramidwirelesspower.com and look at how the same frequency cascade called the Schumann harmonic cascade is pumped by the pyramid, which ancients called the Hummer, and lens through Mercury sometimes, that pyramid pumps the transverse into the longitudinal, into this array, and you can pick up that power at the grid nodes around the planet if you know the frequency signature and if you know the node placement. And Tesla didn't get quite that right. But the point is, then, is that why almost all the pyramids were placed exactly on that array? Because they were able to actually phase couple by harmonic resonance that same propagating longitudinal coherence around the planet, which is a very simple way to understand how you power a planet after you got the planet tuned to that perfect harmonic cascade.
Mhm.
Caduceus called the Schumann phase pump wave, designed by Hermes Thoth, Elena's hero. So you see where this is going. We're saying that if you think about these things carefully and you have some good pictures, you could walk home with a relatively practical understanding of how you get involved with this longitudinal coherence to the point where you understand physicsofsoul.com, pyramidwirelesspower.com, firecrystal.com. We have all these. So these are all based on some very simple implosion physics called charge collapse, planckfire.com. And we hope to share some graphics and have some fun with you and answer questions.
Yes, yes, exactly. I'm just delighted that, as someone like you also comes forward more on a kind of earth-based physics, etc., science, proving that you can discuss and entrain us into the understanding of charge collapse, as long as we're not talking about the bloody Big Bang that is a complete make-up and never happened. As long as we're landing the truth and all our different subjects and ways with, you know what I mean? It's just beautiful. So thank you, Dan Winter. Now we're going
just to say, that's exactly what we're saying, Donnie, is that this Big Bang is actually crap, because the reason Planck is the same for 1,000, million light years in all directions is because that's the length that allows the wave to propagate coherently into the array, meaning Planck is the same, not because of Big Bang. No, because of the agreement on Planck that allowed distribution. Only waves that fit Planck can distribute in the gravity wave. So you don't need the Big Bang to understand why the universe fits together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good. We're exposing the lies. That's what disclosure is. Tony Rodriguez, my love. Hello, welcome, sweetheart. How are you? On mute. You're on mute, darling.
I'm saying I'm good. I'm a little bit overwhelmed by everybody. I really could sit in the audience and watch this show because I'm a fan of everybody here. It's just an amazing group of people, and I'm honored to be among them. So as Dan was saying, I've been working with both Dans, learning from them, the Dans, as I call them, as I refer to them, because it's a wealth of knowledge. I want to say this, that I did have a friend over that stayed with me for a period of time that fell very ill. And I used a Vogel crystal, not this one, but because I'm buried in them now. It's an addiction at this point. And did the Vogel version of putting intention into the water and gave it to my friend, and they were immediately better. Now, unbeknownst to them, I didn't say like, hey, I charged this water and it's going to be healing. I did it unbeknownst and immediately got better. So I had an immediate response within minutes. And that led me down another, as you know, as I've announced at the other Galactic Spiritual Informers Connection conferences, that I'm working on a learning system, which is still in the works, still going. And I was thinking of using the same method of water to make a water charged with the intention of learning ability. So something you could drink that was charged properly through this method that would help you retain knowledge, right? Just help learning, like a cup of water. We always recommend 5 milligrams of B12 before you sit down. Any college student should be taking B12 in the morning. And it really put me down a rabbit hole about what you can do with water, what you can do with charging water through that by essentially magnifying your own intention, your own mental intentions. And I went to both the Dans to learn about the science from it. And I have been working with Dan Winter to try to, because it's a lot that he gives in a short time, to try to stretch it out and make it into more layman's terms so people can understand. Because when I got my head around it, it really was life-changing. I really do see the world as a different place when I understand what he's talking about, how waves can go down to the charge collapse to the Planck. So, and then with what Dan Willis is bringing from ETs, it's getting, what's happening is we have the ability, we have an avenue to get up to speed with ET technology. So for a disclosure, this is one of the most important couplings that has to happen. We have to understand radical technologies that have been hidden from us. I want to remark one more thing on Jerry Will's crystal ball, that I was recently met Jerry in person for the first time at the Rebels of Disclosure conference last month. And Jerry, I got to say that you set that ball out for people to look at, and at least half a dozen people came to me afterwards and said they had immediate response. that they had held it and tried to manifest something, and they had an immediate response the same day, and they couldn't believe it. I just kept overhearing it, and the line was so long that I passed on it, so I didn't touch it. I figured let everybody else go. The line was so long, but it was an amazing thing to hear the testimonies of people afterwards that that touched it and had, like I said, they weren't sure. They didn't. One hand didn't believe in it and manifesting through that. But what we're seeing is that the properties of crystal can magnify your own mental intentions, to put it bluntly, to put it simply. And it's one of the things. So I've got a bunch of projects in the works. I want to promote my book. So this is what I'll be talking about at the conference. A lot of the things about here that I've learned in remote viewing. My testimony, as of many others on this panel and other people elsewhere, is I find hard to believe. And I have the memories of it myself. I find that if I tell somebody, like a relative or a stranger at the store, my story from start to finish, I feel a sense of guilt telling it to them and opening up their mind to something that I know that they just aren't ready to believe. And so I'm always looking for things to prove it, to, substantiate and prove the secret space program is real, that ETs are here working with us, that radical technologies are among us and have been used against us and for us for a long, long, long time. And it was something that I experienced. So unraveling the evidence around my testimony, I found a great deal of evidence around the remote viewing program that I was in originally that took place at the Inyo Airport in 1982. And I went back with my school records and the weather reports from April of 82, as well as the calendar and the Easter break, and was able to narrow down the day that I was taken. My original abduction was April 15th, 1982. And lo and behold, the program, that there's a gap in the program with a Senate Arms Committee inquiry on personnel that could be qualified to be in the program, that ended at the same time that I was there, from April to December of 82. So these are things I documented in the book, and memories that I never really shared about that program in the book, about the way some of the advanced psychoenergetic research that they were doing with both laser stimulation and with the binaurals and the out of body. They used them in a conjunction. And so these are things I put in my book, as well as some of the history of monuments that are shaped and made out of crystalline structures, shaped like some of the things that the Dans are working on. And so this isn't a new technology. This is somebody knew about how to use this. And we see modern monuments around the world that seem to have the ability to mimic some of the ancient technologies that have been mentioned. So that's in my book. I'm really proud of the work. It was the first book I did without Jackie Kenner. And so you can see some of her polish is missing, as far as, the way the words are around, but the information I'm very proud of, because it's my own testimony, and it's a couple years, well, it's many years of research that went into it and finding documents that supported my case. So that's my spiel. And the other thing is, going into the research about the remote viewing, I was able to start my own groups of remote viewing through Talks with Tony on my Patreon, and it's progressed. And we've uncovered things that publicly most remote viewers don't discuss or disclose. So I will go over them in depth in Denver this year. I've been saving it, some of the countermeasures and the psychoenergetics, things that are happening in the remote viewing now that they just don't want you to know. So there's a lot of remote viewing techniques that are still secret, and I'm going to cover a lot of things like that in my presentation. So I'm proud of that.
It's beautiful. It's like you've taken remote viewing and the science of it to a whole different level and making it more accessible. And also the way that you deliver, it allows others that could even conceive of the idea that perhaps they could try it too and get their own very simple to access, results. And it's time that we were all opening our own natural metaphysical pathways internally and accessing every part of us without being told when and what time we can do it. So well done, Tony. And again, those that don't know your story, go ahead.
I was going to say that's absolutely true, Danny, and that's for everybody to know. The remote viewing, you don't have to be a warlock or a witchcraft person with burning candles. Like, everybody can do this. 100% of everybody has the ability to use charge collapse and access the array. This is intuitive psychic ability we happen everybody has it all the time anyway, and we've just been trained to ignore it. And remote viewing is kind of a roadmap to go back. You don't have to be on a super high level to bend spoons or anything, but it's a roadmap to go in that direction and get in touch with your intuitive voice. It's a very easy thing to do. At the last conference, I did a mass remote viewing, and many people had great results. Some people were kind of thrown off by it. It wasn't a fast instruction. It was a fast instruction. But the bottom line is everybody can do this. People come into my group, the course, and they say, Tony, I just like you. I don't think I'm going to be able to do this, but I just want to support what you're doing. And I'm like, well, don't give up, keep trying. And inside of a month, they're getting accurate data. So everybody can remote view, and this is the world we live. This is the real universe we live in, is one that we're in touch with everything. We're in touch with information at any distance, at any time, and we can easily access it. And this is something that people need to know. And so, you know, the mechanics of it are debatable. The more you learn about the rules of how to play poker, the better poker player you are. So that's what the science that Dan Willis and Dan Winter are presenting comes into play. But what I'm doing, I guess I'm the third angle of that pyramid shape, is that I'm trying to do it in ways that everybody can understand, so that, you know, everybody very simply can get in touch with their intuition and access a great deal of information. So sorry, I don't want to be long-winded, Danny. Thank you.
Well, just to say that Tony and I started our great fun together when he mentioned that the obelisks were a tool for remote viewing, and then there's a certain distance from the obelisk to the water. And why is this access to remote viewing better there? And then you can begin to think about access to a longitudinal node, and maybe it's going to work better at sunrise and sunset or magnetic line cross. And you start to think about the principles, and eventually you get empowered to realize this is not magic. It's a very teachable science you can use in an empowered way by understanding how it works. Cool. And Tony's the hero.
That's amazing.
Absolutely.
You know, in kind of rounding up somewhat here, for people watching, and I know you're going to be so impressed with these great men. I mean, like I said at the beginning, this is so braggadocious for me to have these beautiful and very special, long veterans in their field, these great men here. There's a couple missing, but, you know, hopefully nearer the time we'll be able to bring them on. But to give people an understanding of what the galactic and spiritual informers connection is, it is for everyone, no one above another. There are no elites here at all. I don't play with elite people. I don't play with people that put themselves on pedestals. We ain't got time for that. But I do play with the fact that the people on screen, the people going to be speaking, I trust them, I believe them, I adore them. And every year we have different speakers, of course, some core, but of course always bring in different information so people can have access to what was taken from them and withheld from them. Physical proof and evidence for me is key. Taking apart governments, history, space programs, historical leaders, who are they, who were they, or were they who they say they were? We're going to be revealing some of that. Elements of the Khazarian mafia, the future of medicine. We have so many elements, guys, you know, for the audience to be a part of and have access to in our beautiful conference. And of course, we can't present everything online because things are censored and we don't want to get shut down. So we're having this beautiful gathering. Most of the men here don't do conferences. I'm going to come to Dr. Michael Salla for a moment. Sir, you rarely do conferences. Can you tell the audience why GISIC? Why the Galactic Spiritual Informers?